Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Today we are showcasing probably the biggest campaign that on the Spark site that we've had to date, and that is, of course, AuriGen Medical. AuriGen is a deep tech medical implant company that is revolutionizing the management of millions of chronic heart disease patients. They've been awarded 14 million euros worth of aid funding from the Irish government and European Commission programs to help develop their life-changing technology. In addition, they've already raised 3.5 million in equity capital from VCs in the US and the Netherlands, and from Enterprise Ireland and the Western Development Commission, and also a number of private investors, including a professor from the Harvard Medical School. They have a patent that's already been granted. And in 2018, AuriGen ranked first out of 1,280 companies that received funding through the prestigious EU Horizon 2020 funding program from SMEs. And in 2019, a year later, AuriGen ranked first out of 138 companies for the same program for the EU FTI instrument. AuriGen is therefore uniquely the only company in Europe to ever achieve this double first from thousands of companies across all sectors. Amazing validation from very well-respected bodies. AuriGen has the ambition and potential to be a unicorn business, joining other billion-dollar valued businesses such as Stripe, Finergo, and Intercom. This is based on what the company has achieved to date and their third-party validation. The company is EIS qualifying, meaning that investments qualify for a 40% tax rebate, and we've put a short closing date on the campaign so that we can get this rebate allocated to your 2022 income. That date is just a fortnight away on December the 15th. I'd now like to introduce you to Dr. John Thompson, CEO of AuriGen. John, perhaps you can turn on your camera. Thanks very much. John, you're very welcome. John studied medicine at the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin and qualified as a doctor in 2005. He's an MBA from Smurfit Business School, which he completed in 2015. And it was while working as an executive in Pfizer that he had the first ideas for AuriGen emerged. So, John, you're very welcome. Perhaps you'd like to share your screen and you can get started with your presentation, please.
Thank you very much, Chris. Can you see that screen now okay?
Just starting, and there it goes, yeah. Great,
thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Chris, for allowing me to speak at the webinar here. It's a real honor to be involved with AuriGen. The company is a spin out from, sorry, just advancing. Doesn't seem to want to advance. There we go. So the company is a spin out from NUIG. Both myself and Tony O'Halloran, the other co-founder, were both participants in the BioInnovate program in NUIG. So the BioInnovate program has been running now for a number of years. It's based off the Stanford Biodesign program, and it brings together doctors and engineers to solve unmet medical needs. And it was during this program that Tony and I saw the huge unmet medical need in chronic cardiovascular disease. Chronic cardiovascular disease is the biggest killer in the Western world today. It kills more people than all cancers combined. The CSO said in Ireland, just last year, almost 10,000 people in Ireland alone died from chronic cardiovascular disease. So it is a huge, huge area. And I suppose we came into this with very clear, when we started the company in 2008, we had a very clear vision. Our vision was to deliver pioneering, life-changing solutions for patients with chronic cardiac disease. We didn't want to just kind of improve on the technology that had already been there. We actually went right back to first principles and thought, what is in the best interest of the patient? What can we do to make the patient's lives better, make their lives longer, keep them out of hospital more, and also to make physicians' jobs easier? And our mission is to be leaders in curing chronic cardiac disease. And I think most importantly, returning patients back to people. So that's getting patients out of the hospital, back home, where they can be with their families, have a high quality of life, and hopefully live, a lot longer and more productive life. So what are we developing? So AuriGen is developing a minimally invasive implant. So this is an implant that is put in through a very small incision in the groin of a patient and delivered using catheters into the heart, where it's deployed into a structure in the left atrium of the heart called the left atrial appendage. And this These types of procedures now have been done for a number of years. I think the key differentiator with our technology is we aim to make the procedure safer, easier, and we aim to add additional functionality that patients desperately require. That functionality is around preventing strokes, treating underlying atrial fibrillation, and monitoring these patients post-procedure for heart failure and general heart health. So if we look at the kind of key conditions that we aim to address, so within chronic cardiovascular disease, three of the main conditions that patients can develop is atrial fibrillation, heart failure, and stroke. So atrial fibrillation is an irregular heartbeat or an arrhythmia, which can lead to blood clots, which ultimately can cause stroke. Atrial fibrillation also leads to an increased risk of heart failure. And on the other side, patients who have heart failure are at increased risk of stroke and atrial fibrillation. So these three conditions go hand in glove. Existing treatments for patients with, say, stroke and at high stroke risk from atrial fibrillation involve using catheters to put a little device into the left atrial appendage called an LAA occluder. And these devices are very good. They are excellent devices. And if placed properly, they can reduce a patient's stroke risk and they add a lot of value for patients, but they do have limitations. They can be challenging to implant, meaning that the learning curve for new physicians is quite high, and that has limited clinical adoption. And secondly, we believe that if you're going to put a permanent device into somebody's heart, and it's going to remain there for the rest of their lives, then that device should work as hard as possible. And given that these patients have atrial fibrillation as well, and many of them will have heart failure, we believe that the existing LAA occluder devices, as good as they are, represent a major missed opportunity to do more for these patients. So looking at the target market and opportunity, heart failure, stroke, atrial fibrillation, and chronic heart disease is without doubt an epidemic. There are over 100 million patients diagnosed with atrial fibrillation or heart failure worldwide. And to be honest, the diagnosed patients represent only a fraction of the patients who have it. Unfortunately, many patients first discover that they have atrial fibrillation when they present to the hospital with a catastrophic stroke. The EU and US combined market for technologies like ours is over $35 billion today, and it's growing at 20% per annum. We believe that our technology, which is composed of 4 separate devices, all built off a central platform. So we have a central device to which we can add additional modular components so we can treat more complex patients. We believe there's an opportunity for over $6 billion in sales worldwide, of which 2.5 billion would come from the US alone. So our solution in a bit more detail. So we've developed the first device which integrates stroke prevention, heart failure monitoring, and AFib management into a single 30-minute day case non-surgical procedure. So it's a minimally invasive procedure using catheter-based technology. To date, we have over 10 patent applications, of which the first have already been granted internationally. Patients will benefit from our technology by reduced stroke risk, reduced atrial fibrillation burden, and a reduction in heart failure hospitalization, dramatically improving quality of life for our patients. AuriGen's platform can also significantly reduce healthcare costs. What we know today is that in Europe alone, chronic cardiovascular disease, and in particular heart failure, costs over 210 billion euros every year. And that figure is rising dramatically. In the US, predictions state that it could be as high as $1 trillion by the end of this decade. Cardiovascular disease has been driven by the fact that we are all living longer, which is great. We're being treated for cardiovascular disease early. And that meant that patients who might have traditionally died in the past now are living, but they're living with damaged hearts. We also have increased rates of obesity and diabetes, all of which are driving huge increased numbers of heart failure patients and chronic heart disease patients. We believe our platform, by addressing patients in a more comprehensive manner, we can do in a single procedure what would have required multiple expensive procedures today. So we can reduce the burden on healthcare systems, reduce the burden on patients, but also increase the savings that healthcare systems can derive by utilizing our interventions. Looking at our revenue and business model. So AuriGen is currently in the pre-approval phase of our development. We will have ultimately at the time, when all devices are approved, we will have 4 devices, and they will range in costs from $7,500 right up to $25,000. So our base technology, which is an LAA occluder, would compete against devices which are already approved. And in that market, we would look to actually discount our price below the market leaders so that we could share, essentially gain an advantage over those already established devices. In our intermediate markets, where we have essentially a device which adds additional functionality, we would look to get parity or premium pricing against existing devices, which essentially do one single task, and our devices would do multiple tasks for the patient. Post-approval revenue, we believe in year 2 post-approval, we would be at $118 million in sales, rising to $825 million by year 3 when we've fully exploited the US market after FDA approval. Some of the traction and validation that the company's had to date. As Chris said, we've been very fortunate. In 2008, we ranked first out of 1,280 companies to gain prestigious EU Horizon 2020 funding. In 2019, we were ranked first again in the EU Horizon FTI funding. And I think really what this goes to prove is that governments and the European Commission really see the value in new and improved ways to treat patients with chronic cardiovascular disease. They can see that the burden this is having on society, the burden it's having on patients, and most importantly, in their instance, the burden it's having on healthcare systems. This is leading hospitals to be inundated with patients who are very expensive to manage, patients who ultimately want to be at home with their families. And I think they see that there's an enormous value in supporting innovative companies who have at the center of their goal to try and improve life for patients, physicians, and healthcare providers. Between 2018 and 2022, this year, we've been awarded over 14 million in grant support. And I think it goes again to the enormous need for new innovation in this sector. In 2020 and 2021, we received 1.75 million in equity investing from US and European investors. And then earlier, just a few months ago, we raised an additional 1.75 million from WDC, Enterprise Ireland, and US high net worth individual. And this is all to prepare us for first-in-human trials, which we are ready to commence in 2023. Looking at the market overall, the global LAA market really, I suppose, is a very, very new market. But what we can say is that it is exploding. The reason it's exploding is that LAA occluders essentially allow patients to live a life where their stroke risk has now been normalized. Without these LAA occluder devices, patients would need to be on lifelong anticoagulation. And for many patients, this is just not a great option, and they're desperately looking for other solutions. Up until very recently, the only FDA approved LAA occluder device was Boston Scientific's Watchman device. And in February of this year, Boston released a press release that they had implanted their 200,000th device. So we estimate that means that from that single device in a single company in a brand new market, they've made $3 billion already from that. We know they made over $1 billion last year alone. Now, with new competitors coming into the market, so Abbott have just got approval for their device, this market is only going one way. This is going to be one of the biggest markets in medtech in the very near future. Some of the industry analysts expect that this market will be worth about $4 billion in the next 5 years, but that's based on the indication we have today. All of the players in the market are looking to expand that indication so that it encompasses more patients. that looks highly likely to succeed. And when it does, it means that the market for LAA occluder devices is going to be absolutely huge. Our focus is to go further than just LAA occlusion. We want to integrate into these devices AFib, stroke, and monitoring applications. And by utilizing the same platform and same implantation mechanism that the existing devices do, we know that clinicians can essentially pick up and play with our device. There's no big training program. Clinical adoption should be very straightforward once we have regulatory approval, meaning we can aggressively drive sales once the device is approved. Looking at our core co-founder team, as Chris said, my background is as a medical doctor. I also have an MBA, and I worked for many years in Pfizer, where I launched some of our medicines, brought them from clinical trials right the way through regulatory approval to commercial launch. The last medicine I was involved in was a medicine called tofacitinib, and that's now a $2 billion a year medicine. Shira McLean is our COO and co-founder, and she leads our business operations, business planning. Shira is hugely experienced in medtech development and has successfully developed numerous different products from concept to commercialization during her time with Craigana Medical and Abbott Vascular. And finally, Tony O'Halloran is our Chief Technology Officer. Tony is a qualified biomedical engineer with over 20 years experience developing and commercializing cardiovascular devices. He also has a master's in biomedical innovation from NUIG and was part of the BioInnovate program with myself. Supporting us from a board perspective, and we're very, very proud to have Pierre Chavanneau. So Pierre has over 31 years of international business experience. He joined a company called Cameron Health in 2010, which was sold for $1.2 billion to Boston Scientific. And he went on then to lead Boston Scientific's CRM and EP division for 5 years. And under his leadership, they really launched and grew the Watchman device, which is now the market leader. Pierre has absolutely intimate knowledge of this market, the players, and what drives it. And he's a really key asset for us and will be critically important as we move closer to regulatory approval, to acquisition and sales. And Miss Christine Blanchette is one of our technical board members. And Chris was a former vice president within Medtronic's atrial fibrillation solution division. She has huge experience in developing implantable and active medical devices in the atrial fibrillation and cardiac space. And again, is of huge value to us as a team. Financially, as I said already, we have 14 million in grant aid awarded to date. We have no debt on our balance sheet, and we have 3.5 million. We've raised 3.5 million in equity funding from international family offices and Irish VCs. Our competition is it's all of the big medtech companies essentially. I mean, it's very difficult for any of the medtech companies to ignore the LAA space. It's huge and it's growing dramatically. But what we do know is that, you know, our key patents and the direction we're going, it's not to improve on the existing technologies, but to take them to the next level. So to add that functionality that patients need and require. And currently, the existing companies would rather do that over 2 or 3 different procedures and sell 2 or 3 different devices to physicians. Now, that's a benefit to the companies, but it's certainly not a benefit to the patients. And it's definitely not a benefit to the healthcare providers. And we believe as a startup, we can disrupt this market quite aggressively by giving the solution that the patients really need, not the solution that the companies want to sell them. Investment, we're looking for to raise 2.5 million at the moment, of which already 1.75 million is pre-secured. We have EIS tax rebate status, and we believe that this is probably one of the biggest markets in medtech, full stop. This is a huge market with massive unaddressed and unmet medical need. And we believe that with regulatory approval and proper investment, this is a $1 billion opportunity. Our exit strategy, I think, we know that all of the big guys are here in this space. We've already spoken with them all. We've had extensive meetings with Medtronic, with Boston Scientific, with Abbott, with Edwards, with Biosense Webster. They know what we're doing. They're looking at us. I think the key de-risking step for us is clinical trials. And I think if we can show them that our device can be safely implanted and lives up to the potential that we see it has, then there's an absolute opportunity for an early acquisition. However, there's also an opportunity for us to take this a little bit further and add even more value for stakeholders and shareholders, and potentially bring this to regulatory approval or even potentially an IPO. But we will always do what's in the best interest of shareholders, ensuring we maximize their faith and return in us. So why invest in AuriGen? It's a unique, minimally invasive solution for millions of chronic heart failure patients, secured with 10 patents, and we are constantly applying for patents as we develop new aspects of the technology. We're the only company to ever rank first twice out of thousands of companies seeking EU Horizon 2020 funding. And we've been awarded 14 million in grant aid already, which is enormous validation of what we're doing. We estimate that the addressable market in the EU and the US is over 35 billion, growing at 20% per year. We have a very, very highly qualified team around us with a hugely successful track record of commercializing cardiac devices in all of the big med tech companies. We are very close to first in human trials now, and would expect them to start the end of Q2 of 2023. And we would say that this would have a significant uplift on our valuation. We have been a HPSU company with Enterprise Ireland now for a number of years. And as Chris said, we are EIS qualifying, which means that you would be eligible for a 40% rebate on your investment from your tax statement for this year. And that's everything. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, John. Excellent presentation and very clear and precise. So wonderful. We've got a load of questions that have already started to fall into the Q&A. So if anybody else wants to add a question to it, please do so. The Q&A button is at the bottom of your screen, so fire away and we'll get those questions to the team. So so I'm very happy to also say that we're joined by Fergal, who's just turned his camera on, but also Tony O'Halloran, who is AuriGen's Chief Technical Officer, and Shira McLean, who is the Chief Operations Officer. Welcome to you both as well, or welcome to all three of you, in fact. Right, okay, let's see what question. So we've got a first question here. So John, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely will you get approval for first in human and then full clinical trials on humans? Tough one to start with.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I mean, I think we feel very, very confident. I think on a scale of 1 to 10 for first in human, it's probably an 8 or a 9, being realistic about it. We already know what the requirements are. Our team have diligently worked through those requirements, and we're already contracted a CRO, and we're working through what's called the investigator brochure, which will be the documentation that we'll submit to the ethics board. And we would look to be doing that in the early part of next year. But, based on all the feedback we've had from our clinicians and from our CRO and from our advisors, we feel very confident that'll be approved. With that approval, we need to gather first in human data. Provided that first in human data, it looks reasonably clean and the safety of the device looks positive, then we would be very confident that the FDA would approve a pivotal trial for our device.
Very good. Could you just clarify what a CRO is for those people who don't quite know?
Sorry, a contract research organization. My apologies. So that's the team that will support our clinical trials.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Just to follow up on that, John, just what are the chances of getting the full FDA approval, or what's the kind of, I suppose, percentages of devices that get through the process?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question. Our device is what's called a PMA device. So that means that we are considered a high-risk device. PMA devices, by the FDA classification, really account for a very, very tiny minority of the devices. So 1 to 2% max. What that means is, though, that the FDA works very, very closely with those companies. So they tend to work almost hand in glove, and that's been our experience so far. We've had numerous engagements with the FDA, and we've actually traveled out there to Maryland to meet them. And their belief is that, you know, if we work with them throughout the process, use their guidance, the chances of approval are very high. I mean, I think the most recent report I've read from the Food and Drug Institute suggested that the chance of approval of a PMA device now has been 98% in some years. So almost as close to 100%. It has been slightly lower in other years, but in the last few years, there's really been a lot of pressure on the FDA. The Trump administration really brought this to a head, where they placed a lot of emphasis on the FDA to move quicker, to move with companies, and to expedite the approval process, because his view on it was, well, one, we need more innovation, but two, we need more competition. There's a very small number of players in the medtech space, and they are dominating the pricing strategies. And I think his feeling was that if we can get more competition out there, then there's an opportunity for us to be able to, one, get more innovative products, but two, also drive down the prices.
Great.
Good. As this is a class 3 product, it's a big project. Who is supporting you on this, and how are you approaching it, and how can you deliver?
I can take that one, Chris. It's a good question. So John has already alluded to our board. So we're supported by a very strong board and a very strong team of key advisors. So just to recap, our chairman, Pierre Chavanot, he led Boston Scientific's largest European business unit, that's cardiac rhythm management and electrophysiology. So he's hugely experienced in this area. And as John mentioned, he was pretty much responsible for the Watchman program, which is very much in this space. So his experience is crucial to support us in delivering our mission, as is the technical experience of our technical board member, Christine Blanchette. So just to recap again, she was head of Medtronic's Atrial Fibrillation Solution Division. So both the experience and guidance and the what to watch out for and the risk awareness of both of those two key people on our board are crucial to helping us deliver our mission. We also work very closely with Dr. Sandeep Panikkar. He's a consultant cardiologist and electrophysiologist at the Royal Brompton Hospital in London. So he specialises in atrial fibrillation and the left atrial appendage, and he's internationally recognised for his involvement here. He gives us a huge amount of valuable feedback on our device design, on its performance, how it meets user needs, patient needs, and it's a significant part of our process for how we approach the development of our technology and reduce risk. So we are also supported by a very experienced medical advisory board. We have 6 leading interventional cardiologists and electrophysiologists. They're based in Europe and the US. So this team provides medical governance, stakeholder input. They will act as our principal investigators for our upcoming first-in-human clinical studies next year. And they're central to publishing and disseminating the clinical data that will generate from those trials, helping us to accelerate our clinical and commercial exposure across Europe and the US. And then I suppose finally, we're supported by a world-class supply chain who've been on this journey with us since we started our product development. So these companies are leaders in the development and manufacturing of specialized medical technology. So the cardiac implant being one, catheter-based delivery systems, and the manufacturing of those systems. We work very closely with an OEM manufacturing partner who manufacture our device design for us. And then we work with specialized test houses. So all of these companies have been working with us for the last number of years and will continue to support us as we move towards our clinical trials.
Excellent. And that leads us on just to answer another question here. It is intended to subcontract or outsource manufacturing. Sure, is that correct?
Yeah, so we work with an Irish-based OEM manufacturer. They're an international company with several branches based in Ireland. So they're hugely experienced in the manufacturing of medical devices. And as I said, they've been working with us from early in the development. So they've been through all of the various iterations of our design, and they'll be manufacturing our devices going forward.
Excellent. And just maybe a question for you, Tony, just on the other devices on the market. Just someone has a question on, how is your device different and unique? I know John touched on it in the presentation, but is there anything maybe you could add to that?
Yeah, absolutely, Virgil. So when we look at devices and the current state of the art, they can be subdivided into two devices, really, the LAA occluders and the heart failure monitors. Now, looking specifically at the LAA occluders, they have some limitations. The main one being the implantation challenges, as John discussed already. The reason for this is twofold. They have fixed anchors or barbs attached to the outside of the device, and the delivery mechanism is suboptimal. And when I say suboptimal, it's control. You know, you get to a certain point in delivery and the device will spring out. And remember, those barbs are attached. Those barbs go straight into the tissue and can cause a pericardial effusion or a tear, essentially, in the heart wall. Now, those complications are extremely serious, and they make up for over 2/3 of the major procedural complications rate. So it's a very, very real fear with physicians. The other aspect in association with the occluders is, you know, we put these devices in to get the patients off the anticoagulant drugs to prevent thrombus forming, but some of these devices actually can form a thrombus themselves. They're called device-related thrombus formation. These can account for quite a few of the devices if they're misplaced in the left atrial appendage, and primarily because they've got exposed metal in them. So how are we different? I suppose we look at the occluders, there's got no opportunity for a platform. They're passive devices. They do not offer anything for the underlying atrial fibrillation or the heart failure problem, which we know goes hand in glove. On the heart failure side of devices, again, really good devices, but unfortunately they offer no stroke protection, and they are placed outside of the heart, which means that they need a complex algorithm to determine pressure changes within the heart. So AuriGen device is unique in that we've separated the anchor mechanism, making it safer, quicker, much more intuitive to place in the left atrial appendage. Our key value component here is our conduit, where we can build synergistic modules onto the device to make it an active device. So an active device to ablate the tissue and an active from a diagnostic perspective. They're the key elements of our device. We also offer significant device-related thrombus protection in that there's no exposed nitinol on our device, and you know, we're using the best real estate you can utilize in the heart, all from the left atrial appendage, in a single 30-minute procedure, which would otherwise take, you know, up to 3 procedures in patients who are already frail and not tolerant. So essentially what that means is they would never get all 3 because they're too frail. Now we're offering all that in one device.
Very good. Very good. Question here. I note you need to raise a further 30 million euros. Where is this future investment going to come from? And what is the expected valuation likely to be?
Thank you, Chris. I can answer that. So, as I said, we've been very fortunate to have EU Commission support throughout the entire lifespan of the company. Most recently, in the last number of months, we have had approval for what's called blended financing from the European Investment Bank, which means the European Investment Bank will take a stake of up to 15 million euros in our next round. And we would look to supplement that then with, we've had multiple conversations with VCs in both Europe and the US, all of whom expressed significant interest in investing in AuriGen. The key kind of trigger for them to invest is first in human trials. So I think once we've got those first in human trials done with the support of the European Investment Bank, we feel very, very confident we'll be able to raise the 30 million in pretty quick order.
Good.
Brilliant. A question about the strategy. So can the guys please tell me more about your commercial strategy?
Yeah, sure. I can handle that, Virgil. Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, we're looking first to doing our trial first in human first, and then we go on to our IDE pivotal trial We're looking to get CE mark approval probably towards the end of 2025, which would allow us to launch in Europe. Initially, we'd look to launch in the 4 biggest medical devices markets, which is Italy, the UK, Germany, and France. And we would look to actually support that with our own sales force. In 2027, we're looking then to get FDA approval, at which point we would look to set up a headquarters in the US. And we would initially drive the first sales from there before utilizing a distributor network to establish a network of distributors across other jurisdictions where we would have approval. So that would be Japan and Canada, New Zealand, Australia. So that's kind of the main kind of brunt of what the next strategies are. And to fund that, we would look to, if at that point we haven't been acquired, which I think the likelihood is, given the technology in the space we're in, we would be acquired. But if we hadn't been acquired, we'd obviously be in a very, very strong position to IPO the company, generating the finances required to do that kind of a global launch. We can see, similar medtech companies. So there's a company called Shockwave, and their device wouldn't be a platform device. It's a phenomenal device, but they IPO'd just a few years ago, and their valuation now is over $10 billion, and they're dramatically eating up market share. So there's definitely opportunities there for acquisition. But if we go down the IPO road, obviously it's a longer time scale, but the value inflection is even greater.
Okay, I'm going to merge a couple of questions here from a couple of people. You seem to have been very successful with grant funding to date. Why do you think that is? And what have you done with the funds? And so there's also a person who's said, with the 14 million that's already raised, what have you got left of that? Perhaps you could tell us that.
Yeah, sure, Chris, I can take that one. I suppose to start with the first part, we have been very successful with grant funding. Couple of reasons why. I think, this is a high risk, high reward undertaking, what we're trying to do. So we're targeting a class 3 device, which requires pre-market approval, in terms of the regulatory route, but it can potentially revolutionize the treatment paradigm for chronic heart disease patients. So a lot of the grant funds recognize this and want to support us on our journey to getting to that key de-risking point, which is the execution of the first in human clinical trials. And that's going to be the trigger, to onboard further investment. So to give you an example, so the Irish Government Disruptive Technology Innovation Fund, or the DTIF, their top kind of objectives state that they want to support Irish companies in exploiting opportunities associated with disruptive technologies by de-risking these kinds of projects and helping us to overcome challenges associated with disruptive technologies, especially technologies that will have a transformative impact on the way we work and live in the future. And that's taken verbatim from their objectives. And this pretty much underpins, what we're trying to do in terms of our vision and mission. Similarly, the European Commission, in some of the interview feedback that we got from them, they described AuriGen as a unicorn in the making and a potential European champion in cardiovascular therapies. So again, they are very much behind us in trying to get us to that point where we can de-risk the technology and trigger the further investment. I think the last point is, we know that there are over 200 million people living with coronary heart disease globally. It causes 1 in 3 deaths globally, and that's 19 million deaths a year, or I suppose in short, deaths every 1.8 seconds. And we know research has shown us that living with these conditions doesn't just affect the person or the patient, but that of their families and their support system. So in short, governments and individuals that have worked through these grant aid fund structures, they want to support us because they understand the enormous burden of cardiovascular disease on the healthcare systems and families. So I guess that's the why we've been successful. In terms of what we've done to date, so everything we've done to date has been to develop the technology and de-risk it. So we've built a world-class experienced team of 27 full and part-time experts, established an international advisory board, which I talked about earlier. We've established a very strong supply chain and development partners. I think most importantly, we have completed extensive both acute and chronic preclinical testing and product validation. And that's been validated through a number of different testing routes, as well as validated by our advisory board. We're compiling our data into our investigator brochure. That'll be used then to help us move forward to those clinical trials. We've completed our site selection for those clinical trials, secured our principal investigators. We've established our regulatory strategy, built our quality system. We've developed an extensive IP portfolio. So essentially, that's what the funding has allowed us to do to date. In terms of looking forward towards that first in human, the funding continues to support us with the delivery of that. We have secured further funding from European Commission, and that's going to help us to deliver that first in human clinical trial next year.
Just to follow on from that then, so the cost of actually getting the first in human and the 2.5 million that you're raising at the moment, how do those two combine? So is that the 2.5 million that you're raising at the moment going to be used to pay for the first in human?
Absolutely. So it's going to be supplemented by a further grant, which John mentioned earlier, we've just received from the European Commission. So that'll supplement this current raise, and that's what's going to be used to deliver a first in human clinical next year.
Great, thanks.
Brilliant. Just a technical question on the device. Does the device require lifelong anticoagulation post-implant?
So I can handle that.
Okay.
So the answer is, Fergal, no. So the device at the moment would require anticoagulation until the point at which the device, essentially, the tissue around it grows over it. It's called a process called endothelialization, and this is standard with all LAA occluder devices. So depending on the jurisdiction, it's slightly different, but it would be a number of months, at which point then the patient would no longer require anticoagulation. But that would be in discussion with their physician at a routine checkup post-op, and that's consistent with all of these devices. So our device would be no different in that regard, but it would be consistent with all of the existing technology.
Okay, time for a couple more. There are a lot of big players in this competitive space. How easy is it for someone to do what you're doing? Kind of any of the big players steal your lunch?
Yeah, that's a good question, Chris. One that we're acutely aware of here. So I guess John touched on it earlier on. We've got 10 patents that we're now actually starting to see get international approval. We've a further 3 patents there that we're ready to issue, all covering all specific novel and inventive elements of our device. I suppose competitors have been fixated on how do we make the existing therapy better, rather than how do we make an intuitive leap to make the procedure much better and capture those patients that absolutely need more than just either a stroke, a heart failure monitor, or an ablative device. So we looked at this in depth. We understood, well, how could these companies take their existing devices, merge them together to achieve what we're trying to achieve? And out of that, we've created a number of competitive blocking patents, a number of prior art, establishing to protect how we're doing the procedure right now, but also to future-proof it in terms of how a competitor may do it at some point in the future.
Great, thank you.
Good. Just another question here, actually, from someone. So well done on your hard work to the whole team. I work in Boston Scientific. I won't give too many details away, but they're following the Watchman product, but they're just asking how you choose the first in human trials. How are they selected? And can someone known to them apply for one of those trials?
So I can answer that. So the first in human trials, they unfortunately won't be conducted in Ireland for a number of reasons. Ireland is a relatively challenging jurisdiction to do first in human trials in. The approval process takes quite a bit longer, and the costs are quite high. So the trial will be done in Eastern Europe. So the first in human trials, unfortunately, they wouldn't be able to participate in, but we'd be very anxious to have trial centres in Ireland when we're doing our FDA trial. So we would look to recruit patients in the US and in Europe. And certainly if there's an opportunity for us to have trial centres in Ireland, we would be very eager to do that.
Fantastic.
Question here, have you spoken to the regulatory authorities like the FDA? And I think you mentioned that you have, but another follow-on one to that is that have any cardiologists invested in the recent funding rounds as well?
So to date, we haven't actually gone out to any cardiologists. We've been quite lucky so far in that the funding we've gotten has been from both WDC, EI, and from high net worth individuals that we met who are deeply embedded in this space. We would be very open to getting money from cardiologists, but I think, this is the first time we've actually started to go out to the market. We were very intrigued by the opportunity of crowdfunding, and it kind of goes back to the mission that we have. We're very much a patient-centric company, and we recognize that, there may well be a lot of people out there that the mission that we have resonates for, and we thought there was an opportunity for those people to be involved at an early stage. But certainly we're very open to having investment from cardiologists. But up until now, we've been able to fund the company without actually having to go looking for financing.
I think you have said in the past, John, that there's a professor of Harvard Medical School who's invested, though.
Yes, he's not a cardiologist, though. He's in the biostatistics and area. And I think what really resonated with him about our technology was, well, one, the enormous medical need, but two, for him, was the data. The data acquisition that a system like ours will be capable of generating. Now, obviously, there's, that needs to go through all of the right, it needs to be treated ethically. But I think purely from the research opportunities that data like that would produce and how valuable that data would be to other innovators in the space, whether they be medical device, pharma, or healthcare providers, is absolutely incredible. And I think he really saw the opportunity here was around having all of these devices in there, making them smart, and being able to gather and aggregate this data and use that to help patients in the future.
Good. Excellent. Another question here on other procedures and what's existing, what the current procedure. So what percentage of current procedures use alternative devices, fail or cause problems? So on the existing technology that's out there, what's the success rate, or what generally, what are the risks effectively of this device or comparable devices having issues or failing?
So I would say the first part is that the rate at which these devices are being used, certainly in Europe, is relatively low at the moment. What we have seen is, though, in the US, that the market opportunity is enormous and it's growing very quickly. So not only is that the market opportunity for LAA occlusion, but also the market opportunity for arrhythmia management and heart failure management. What are the risks associated with these devices? I think, the main risks around these devices come from the implantation risks. So, there are some very highly experienced cardiologists who put these in, and in their hands, these devices are very safe. The issue comes when you have less experienced physicians trying to learn the procedure, and the learning curve of the existing devices is quite high, and that can often put physicians off and make them not want to engage. And so clinical adoption, I think, has been lower than would have been anticipated, even though it's $1 billion market opportunity. And there's a huge drive from all of the med tech companies to make these devices easier and safer to implant, because they know if they can do that, they're going to grow their market dramatically. And I think, that was one of the first things we focused on when we were developing this technology, was to work with the cardiologists to implant these devices and go, how can we make them better? How can we make them safer? How can we make them easier? When you're training some of your junior staff, what are the biggest problems they have when they're putting in these devices? And what could we do to engineer out those problems? And that's where the AuriGen device came from. Then the next thing we asked them was, with the patients you treat, what are the main conditions that they come in with as well? And, they come in and they say, well, a lot of these patients have, chronic atrial fibrillation that we can't treat. A huge number of these patients, in some cases up to 70%, have heart failure. And we were like, well, how much better would it be for you if you could implant this device safely and be able to monitor that patient's heart failure using the same device? And they were like, well, that would be game changing. So, that's where this came from. Our device originated not because we thought we had some cool technology and we were trying to figure out a place to put it. It came from speaking to patients and physicians in Europe and the US and going, what is the biggest problems that you have now? and what would a solution look like for those problems, and then going back and figuring out if we could engineer it. So we came at it very much not from we've got cool tech and let's try and find a place to use it. We said, here's a huge problem. How can we try to solve it?
Great. Time for one last question. What are your potential options on exit? What does it look like, and what are the triggers for acquisitions, please?
Yeah, great question, Chris. So I think, there's three main points that that a company like ours would be considered for exit. I think the first point would be, positive human data. So that could be relatively soon, at which point a company may well say, we like this. We would like to take this product now, and we will do the clinical trials because we can put our own spin on it, ensure that it meets our requirements from a marketing perspective and from a sales perspective. And we would estimate, based on similar kind of correlates out there for implantable devices, a sale price of 500 to 600 million wouldn't be unacceptable or unreasonable in that scenario. The next main point would be kind of the baseline, and that would be that we would get the device to CE mark regulatory approval. So it would be fully de-risked. The device would be in a very strong position. Sales could start immediately, but wouldn't have FDA approval, at which point then, the valuation of the company would probably be in excess of $1 billion. And then the last point then would be, we would go all the way to FDA approval, at which point, the valuation would be significantly above that. To be honest, if we go that far, we would IPO the company because we'd have created so much value at that point. An acquisition probably wouldn't be in the best interest of shareholders.
Very good. Excellent. As always, we've got far too many questions than we have time to answer them. So we'll get these questions over to the team and they'll answer them manually, and we'll put those up onto the platform, onto the Spark discussion, onto the Spark document section tab. But thank you very much, guys. Brilliant display, brilliant presentation, and excellent questions. Thanks very much. So we've heard from the team, and I think you'll agree that it's very much worth a serious consideration for investment. It just might be that next unicorn that Ireland produces. It certainly has the ambition and certainly has the potential. So if you'd like to have a follow-on call with any of the guys, please give me a call or please drop me a line, and we can arrange that, a private Zoom or a telephone call or face-to-face meeting. And we're very happy to do that. And don't forget, we've accelerated the time or condensed the time for the whole campaign so that we can get this in for the EIS for 2022. So this campaign closes and it's got a hard stop on it for the 15th of December. So if you want to get in at this stage and if you want to invest, please do so before that point. And then we will get that EIS the investment done within 2022 for that 2022 EIS slot. So thanks very much. So guys, thank you very much for today. Thanks very much for your contribution. Virgil, thank you very much for your questions, and thank you very much for attending, everybody, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.